Hello, today I will talk about The Conquest of Happiness by Bertrand Russell, and the book is written or published in 1930. So the book is basically, I think it's called as early self-help book, and in this book the philosopher Bertrand Russell, he examines what makes people unhappy and what makes people happy. And it's important to stress that he says that, well, there's basically two things that can make someone unhappy or happy. There's both the social system and then there's also individual psychology. And in this book he's not going to focus on the social system. So one thing you may say is that, well, people are unhappy because they have to work under a boss or something in the capitalist system, and that may very well be right. But in this book, he's not gonna focus on that. He's just gonna focus, okay, what can an individual do right now in his life to try to become more happy? And another thing he also talks about is that, for example, we should try to abolish war. That would be a good thing. And also economic exploitation. But again, that's kind of social things, and he will write about that in some other book. And in this book, he will just focus on what can the individual do to try to become more happy. And so he assumes a few things. He assumes that the person he's talking to that wants to try to become more happy or become happy because the person is unhappy, the person must have adequate food, he must have shelter, he must have decent health. So for example, if you live in extreme misery or one has just lost a child or something, or has maybe suffers under public disgrace, then he may probably not be able to help. And this is kind of, as he says, it's maybe extreme cases, at least with some of the people. And for others, if you're homeless, if you don't have a home, if you don't have a home, then basically it's gonna be hard to, you need to have these basic things just to achieve happiness. And you may very well have all these basic things that a lot of people, and also in our society today, they have the wife and kids and house, and also just you have a apartment and you have enough to eat, but you still may be unhappy or discontent, and you may not even really know why you're unhappy. You may just have like a normal life, you may be doing well in school and still be unsatisfied. And what Bertrand Russell here tries to do is that he tries to talk to this person and tries to give them some advice, what he thinks that one can do to become more happy. He states that unhappiness is largely due to mistaken views of the world, and thus, if we just use reason, we can actually become more happy. The first part of his book, he talks about reasons for unhappiness, and he has a lot of different reasons for unhappiness. One of them, for example, is unhappiness due to nature of the universe, and he calls it Byronic unhappiness after this poet who lived in the 1800s, I think. But it's basically a idea that if you try to think about the world and how nature is and the facts of the world, then necessarily that must be depressing, and thus the really clever, intelligent person will be unhappy. And if somebody is happy, they're just stupid, they don't understand how the world works. If they are happy, they don't know that in 10 billion years the sun is gonna explode or the sun is gonna expand so much that the earth will be covered, or in 10 billion years, something like that, then the universe will be so cold that all life will cease to exist. And this person will say, all right, that's how the universe works, and that's how the world is, and thus I am unhappy. And I actually used to have this attitude that, the universe is kind of like this scary, cold place. And, that may be true, but it may not be a reason for unhappiness. Anyway, he claims that it is putting the cart before the horse. So what it is that the person is unhappy in his life for some reason, and then he tries to look for a reason for why he's unhappy. And then he comes to the conclusion that, well, I'm unhappy just because, or I'm unhappy and the world is, the universe, the sun's going to explode in 10 billion years or something. So that's why I'm unhappy. While the reason for his unhappiness may be something entirely different that he hides for himself. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he has some personal issues or something, which he does not want to face, and therefore he thinks that, well, it's the universe that's making me unhappy, and all rational people are just will be this way when they think about it logically. He also mentioned, for example, just briefly, competition, the struggle for life can be part of unhappiness, and he also mentions envy. And I'll not go into them. I'll just mention that's just as part of some examples of what he mentions. The one that I will go into a little is the sense of sin, and what he says that basically the things you have learned when you were a little boy by maybe your mother or maybe a nurse, because they used to have quite often nurses that time. You may have learned maybe a Christian concept of sin or all these things that you now do not think much about, but are still part of your unconsciousness. And therefore, when you do things, you feel a sense of shame. If you go out and drink, have fun with your friends, and let's say you get together with a girl or something, then you may have like the sense of sin that you are sinning against the world, and that may make you unhappy just because you have still these prejudices from your childhood that you have not examined rationally. I think this is one of the examples that's kind of in a way outdated, because in 1930 I think the sense of sin was probably a lot larger, more important than today. But I still think there can be a lot of things from your childhood that is just part of you, and what he recommends that you examine all your beliefs rationally and reject those that are just prejudice or you cannot argue for. Another thing he says that can be a cause of unhappiness is fear of public opinion. And what he basically says is that you should not care that much about public opinion. It's not really a big deal. And then he says you should only care about public opinion, and then I will quote him: "One should as a rule respect public opinion insofar as is necessary to avoid starvation and to keep out of prison. But anything that goes beyond this is voluntary submission to an unnecessary tyranny and is likely to interfere with happiness in all kinds of ways." So one modern example could be that perhaps public opinion says that if you're in a relationship, you should be monogamous, you should not be with others, but and then you just take that for granted and you never explore if maybe an open relationship could be better, and you never discuss that with the one you are with, that maybe we should have an open relationship, and that might be something that both of you would work very well for both of you. But just because you fear public opinion, you fear how other people would react, you don't do that at all. And he doesn't just dismiss public opinion completely, which you often hear that, well, you should not care about public opinion at all. And he says, well, you should care as far as you shouldn't get into prison and you shouldn't starve. So that's how far you should care about public opinion. I really like that sentence. I think that was very interesting. And then this is kind of like a fun fact, a fun quote from the book, where he talks about, I think he's like 60 or 50. He's pretty old when he writes this, but still he actually talks for the young against the old. So what he says is, while it is desirable that the old should treat with respect the wishes of the young, it is not desirable that the young should treat with respect the wishes of the old. The reason is simply, namely, that in either case it is the lives of the young that are concerned, not the lives of the old. I think that's just very interesting, that usually when there's a conflict between young and old, it's usually how the young should lead their lives. You know, the old parent disapproves of the lover the young girl has chosen, and it's rarely that you have the young girl who's like going into a fit because his father has married a new wife or something. So the conflicts between young and old are usually how the young should live the life and not how the old should live the life. And that is why he takes the side of the young, that the young should not respect the wishes of the old, but the old should respect the wishes of the young, because the old is trying to dominate the young, and the young is usually not trying to dominate the old. So I also love that quote. Alright, enough of unhappiness. Let's talk about happiness. So first of all, he asks, is it possible to be happy? And he answers yes. And it's actually interesting because when he was young, he actually says that he tried to commit suicide because he was so distressed. I think it was in his teenage years. But I think he said that mathematics actually was the thing that kept him alive. And then I think he lived to be like almost 100, so he lived a long time. And you can't just be a complete pessimist or complete life hater if you live to be 100. So I think he really learned to appreciate life while still fighting for good causes. So he got yelled during World War I for opposing the war, and I think he also campaigned against the nuclear weapons. I'm pretty sure he was once asked by someone that, because he was also a great mathematician, that he was great at mathematics, that, why are you in the street, why are you not inventing stuff for mathematics or researching and furthering the science? And then he said that if I'm not here, if I don't try to prevent it, there will be no science of the future, because the world will be destroyed. But so yeah, he actually used to be very unhappy, and now he had achieved somewhat of a happiness. And he says there's two sorts of happiness. There's animal, and then there's spiritual happiness. And animal happiness is open to everyone, and to get spiritual happiness you need to be able to read and write. So that's also basically everyone today. But for spiritual happiness, what he mentioned, he gives an example of a man digging wells, and he was just extremely happy to create these wells and just digging. And he could use his body, could use his muscles, and he had a part in society. And this man, he says that it was only in his later years that he learned what parliament was, but he was still happy, completely happy. And the other part of happiness, spiritual happiness, he mentions the man of science, who is very often happy because he can actively use his abilities, and he also has public approval of what he does. And so he has both things, compared to, say, an artist who he says that he needs to, often the public will not understand his work and thus will not be interested in his work. And then he must compromise with his ideals to be able to sell and be able to live. Where he says that, for example, most people don't understand Einstein and his theory of relativity, but he still became a superstar. Even though people didn't understand it, they still was in awe of it, kind of like a sage or mystic or something like that. And one thing is this, why the young is often prevented from happiness is that young, intelligent people, they have no outlet for their talents, and thus that leads to unhappiness. But he gives the secret, and his secret for happiness is that you must let your interests be as wide as possible and not be self-absorbed. And what he says is that, and this may be kind of trite or commonplace, and people will go, well, everybody says that. But what he says is that you need to find something meaningful for you to do and something that you actually believe in. And for example, a belief in a cause can be a great thing. So, for example, if you lived when there was slavery, if you can believe that you should abolish slavery and this is something you might work towards, that can be a great thing for having a sense of purpose and happiness. And this will also make you take pleasure in your work. So I think Bertrand Russell will argue that it will be can be hard to find happiness if you have to spend, say, 8 hours a day doing something you find completely irrelevant or something like that. But one thing that I like when he says, or one thing that he says that is actually fundamental to happiness, and something I think is not quite self-evident, is that he says that people should have a friendly interest in things and persons, and this will be so. For example, a guy studying rocks will have a friendly interest in them, but if someone studies spiders because he's afraid that, or he wants to live somewhere where there's no spiders, that's kind of like a hostile interest in them. But he says that it's best to have a friendly interest in things and persons, because then you can also, you can have relations with persons and be interested in how they are. And he says that if they are very peculiar, it might not annoy you so much. And also it will help you not be grasping and possessive in your personal relations, and not have personal relations where you seek to gain power over the other person, which most likely will lead to conflict and unhappiness. So this was a short description of some of the things that are in, a few of the things that are in this book. And for some reason, my copy of the book, the cover of 4 bananas next to each other, kind of like somewhat darkish bananas, not completely yellow, but still pretty yellow. And to conclude this, I'm just wondering, why is there 4 bananas on this cover? If somebody can tell me why there's 4 bananas on this cover, I would be very grateful. But it just seems to me very random, and he doesn't mention bananas anywhere, I'm pretty sure, in this book. So that's just, I guess, a fun, or I'm not sure how fun the fact is. Anyways, thanks for staying a while and listening. That's gonna be my new motto at the end of the show, I think. And I'm pretty sure I said it correctly. So anyways, thanks for staying a while and listening, and see you.